February 27th, 2016, Saturday of the second week of Lent.
A reading from the book of the prophet Micah. Shepherd your people with your staff, the flock of your inheritance that dwells apart in a woodland in the midst of Carmel. Let them feed in Bashan and Gilead as in the days of old. As in the days when you came from the land of Egypt, show us wonderful signs. Who is there like you, the God who removes guilt and pardons sin for the remnant of his inheritance, who does not persist in anger forever, but delights rather in clemency, and will again have compassion on us, treading underfoot our guilt. You will cast into the depths of the sea all our sins. You will show faithfulness to Jacob and grace to Abraham, as you have sworn to our fathers from days of old. The word of the Lord.
The response is, the Lord is kind and merciful. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all my being, bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. The Lord is kind and merciful. He pardons all your iniquities. He heals all your ills. He redeems your life from destruction. He crowns you with kindness and compassion. The Lord is kind and merciful. He will not always chide, nor does he keep his wrath forever. Not according to our sins does he deal with us, nor does he requite us according to our crimes. The Lord is kind and merciful. For as the heavens are high above the earth, so surpassing is his kindness toward those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he put our transgressions from us. The Lord is kind and merciful.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to listen to Jesus. But the Pharisees and scribes began to complain, saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So to them Jesus addressed this parable. A man had 2 sons, and the younger son said to his father, "Father, give me the share of your estate that should come to me." So the father divided the property between them. After a few days, the younger son collected all his belongings and set off to a distant country, where he squandered his inheritance on a life of dissipation. When he had freely spent everything, a severe famine struck that country, and he found himself in dire need. So he hired himself out to one of the local citizens, who sent him to his farm to tend the swine. And he longed to eat his fill of the pods on which the swine fed, but nobody gave him any. Coming to his senses, he thought, "How many of my father's hired workers have more than enough food to eat? But here am I, dying from hunger. I shall get up and go to my father, and I shall say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me as you would treat one of your hired workers.' So he got up and went back to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father caught sight of him and was filled with compassion. He ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son.' But his father ordered his servants, 'Quickly, bring the finest robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Take the fattened calf and slaughter it. Then let us celebrate with a feast, because this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found.' Then the celebration began. Now the older son had been out in the field, and, on his way back, as he neared the house, he heard the sound of music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked what this might mean. The servant said to him, Your brother has returned, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf, because he has him back safe and sound. He became angry, and when he refused to enter the house, his father came out and pleaded with him. He said to his father in reply, Look, all these years I served you, and not once did I disobey your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat to feast on with my friends. But when your son returns, who swallowed up your property with prostitutes, for him you slaughtered the fattened calf. He said to him, My son, you are here with me always. Everything I have is yours. But now we must celebrate and rejoice, because your brother was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found. The Gospel of the Lord.
February 27th, Saturday of the second week of Lent. The first reading comes from the book of the prophet Micah, chapter 7, verses 14 to 15 and 18 to 20. This passage speaks about how the Lord will be a shepherd to Israel. This is an important image in the history of Israel, because the kings were supposed to be the shepherds of the people, but Micah recognized that the kings had failed in their responsibility, so God himself would have to intervene. In fact, God would allow them to pasture in Bashan and Gilead as of old. These are territories that the Israelite people had lost. This was a message that shows the restoration that God would enact, so much so that God would forgive their sins. The greatness of God is not that he can destroy a country in a second. The greatness of God is that he wouldn't hold his anger against Israel, that he would forgive their sins, and that would show his faithfulness to Jacob, his mercy to Abraham. That the covenant is not so much only the promise that Israel would receive the promised land, it's also the promise that God would forgive his people their faults. The Gospel is from Luke 15, 1 to 3, and 11 to 32. Here we see a great example of how God forgives the faults of the people of Israel. Jesus eats with tax collectors and sinners, and remember, the Pharisees refused to eat that because they considered sin to be a type of contagion, that if you ate with them you would catch what they had. Therefore, they refused. Jesus doesn't, because he recognizes that sin has caused an alienation. Now, granted, these people chose their sin, they chose their alienation, but in spite of that, Jesus feels sorry for them. He only wants to heal them. So he tells the parable of the prodigal son. Now, a lot of people say the title of this parable should really be the prodigal father, because prodigal doesn't mean one who got lost and sinned. Prodigal means incredibly generous, and that's what the father is. The younger son asks for his inheritance, which is an incredibly rude thing to do. You get your inheritance when somebody dies. So he's basically telling his father, I wish you were dead. The father gives his share of the inheritance, and the young son goes off and squanders it. Now, probably it's intended to mean with Gentiles, because at one point the son will be feeding pigs, something that would happen in a Gentile country. What is important, though, is that when the son runs out of money and food, he decides to return to his father. Now, the father, if he were truly a righteous man, according to Jewish standards, would have killed his son. That's the obligation in the Torah of a father towards a disobedient son. If he were only a mediocre observer of the Jewish law, then he would stay in his house and wait until his son begged his forgiveness. This father is outside waiting for his son, and as soon as the son appears, he forgives his son. Notice, before the son says a word, the father has already embraced him and forgiven him. Why? Because he knows that the son is not really sorry for what he did. The son is sorry for the fact that he's hungry, that he got caught. And he'll say anything that's necessary to be forgiven. But there's no indication that the son is really sorry. The father forgives him anyways, throws a feast. Now, the other brother is a bit angry because he has been working for his father this whole time, and he tells his father, you've never given me even so much as a goat to share with my friends. So notice, what the brother wanted was not so much the father's love. He wanted the father's possessions just as much as the younger son did. And he's really upset that the father forgave the younger son who has squandered these goods. Sometimes we fall into that category. We're angry that people get away with things, and We almost say to ourselves, if I had known that, I would have fun and sin, and then I would be pardoned too. And it's just the wrong attitude. We're talking about relationships, about love, and not about who can get the most out of God. We're talking about wanting to give of ourselves, wanting to be available. And the father says to the brother, we had to celebrate. That's one phrase that's used very often in Luke's gospel. We had to do this. Very often it's used to refer to the fact that the Messiah had to suffer and die. But in this case, we had to be merciful. Because your brother was dead and now he's alive. That's God's joy when somebody turns back from sin. He's thrilled to death. And may God bless us.